Hello and welcome to the Global Fashion Workshop channel. I remind you that we release a new video 3 times a week. Today we are working with an eyelet fabric, but today's lessons can apply to any other fabric, not only for eyelet. You can also finish the edges of any other fabric. For example, a linen, an embroidered fabric, embroidered net, or anything else. It doesn't matter. Today we are working with eyelet. I'll show you how to finish the folded hem and stitch it. I mean how to finish the hem of a garment like this, a dress for example. Also, I'll show you how to bind the plain seam. Before we start binding, let's first prepare the bias tape. The fabric is cut exactly on the bias. I always use a ruler. I cut the fabric on the bias. Here is the ruler always next to me. I checked everything. It's perfectly straight. You even will have no chance to cut it wrong because everything is perfectly laid out. One more thing. Press the ruler with your fingers well, because the fabric could move easily. Imagine if you have a chiffon. I've got a lightweight batiste, absolutely fine and light. You need to know how much bias tape you will need to bind the seams, the hem, or whatever you want. Prepare the bias tape ahead of time. You prepare all the bias tapes, hang them next to you, and use them with this eyelet fabric one by one. Organize your work correctly. Prepare all the required number of bias tapes that you will need ahead of time. Don't make the bias tape before each next seam that you have to bind. This work is not well organized. I repeat once again, organize your work correctly. I am laying our fabric on the bias. Straighten out the edge using the ruler and mark as many bias tapes as you need. I need 2 strips. I am drawing 2 strips. Notice how accurately I am working. The fabric isn't moving. My subscribers ask me a lot of questions. For example, how do you work with the silk? How do you work with mesh? How do you work with the chiffon? How do you work with batiste or light fabrics like this? Very carefully, accurately, control everything. I can say precision and accuracy and thoroughness, nothing more. It's moving to all sides. Be careful. I'm trying. This batiste behaves like the chiffon. It's so incredibly thin. Whoever makes bias tapes for the first time, please find a cotton batiste. This batiste is made from silk and viscose. The percent of silk is higher than the viscose. See, it's not as bad as it looks, but thoroughness is important. I'm trying, as I said. The last thing you want to do is lose the line. It's important. So I cut 2 bias tapes. Let's go do some pressing and preparing the bias tapes. Here is the bias strip, 3 centimeters wide. We have to make folds about 7 millimeters. If you have any doubts, mark the middle, but I think you can do without it. Pin it first here to the pressing board, about 7 millimeters, and press it carefully.
И вот так вот аккуратненько будем заутюживать.
There are such devices to make a bias tape, but they stretch the fabric a little. It's difficult to work with thin fabrics using bias tape makers. Press the fold to the end. Most important is to not stretch it in the length. Because any pulling will make the bias tape narrow. It will stretch out too much. Do the same with the second side.
И теперь вторую сторону. Точно так же. Все то же самое, не растягивать.
Don't pull it.
Немножко я взяла первый
Now
раз
make the
шире, чем
fold
надо на
a
миллиметр.
1 millimeter
Будьте
wider
внимательны.
than the first one. Pay attention. Be careful, especially if you use a synthetic fabric, because it's easy to burn it. Next, I will fold the fabric and press it. While in the process of piping, the top side should be longer by 1 millimeter than the lower part. For this reason, we fold it not in half, but at 1 millimeter shorter than the edge. Those folds shouldn't match. What a needle! It doesn't stick. So let's wrap it. And you see that the top layer doesn't reach a 1 millimeter to the low layer. It's important. These are some tailoring secrets that I share with you. Oh, use less steam here, or you'll burn your fingers like me. So why don't I bring 1 millimeter to the edge? And why don't I match the folds? When I start sewing, you will see. Don't stretch it to the length. Don't pull it up. All the way to the end. Perfect. And the most important thing, don't make such moves with the iron. It twists the bias tapes. Move the iron from the top to the bottom. That's right. I think the one bias tape is enough for me. I will sew this piece along the hem, and this piece I will sew along the piping. You see, the one side of the bias tape is longer by 1 millimeter than the second. I lay the fabric on the right side. This is the right side, and this is the wrong side. Put the fabric into the bias tape, not from the edge, but a little farther. I put it inside and wrap it around. Because our bottom part is 1 millimeter longer, I can catch it easier. Let's stitch it to the edge by 1 millimeter. Or you can baste, but basting the bias tape has its own nuances. Sometimes it will lead to inaccuracy. Stitching takes more time, but it's reliable. Let's start sewing. Put everything here using a needle. Don't stretch and don't pull the bias tape. I carefully put our sewing into the machine and stitch it to the edge. But I'm not done yet. We can't leave the garment with this bottom where the bias tape will be placed around the edge. I'm going to turn it inside out. This master class is important. Please be careful. The cotton fabric has such shape stability. It's easy to put it there. Of course, if you have a silk or something more slippery, for example, a viscose, a staple, or something else, it will be harder to work with. Cotton is a nice fabric to work with. Look, it would appear that I am sewing roughly. Actually, I sew correctly. But why? It's because these little holes are inside. It creates different hardnesses inside. There are holes, there is embroidery, and there is the batiste. And we get some kind of rough stitching. Don't worry about it. You will do just like that. If you sew on rough fabric, there's no way around it. Eyelet is not difficult. We have to make sure that we catch the bottom part here.
Не так сложно работать с шитьем. Самое главное, мы должны быть уверены, что мы захватываем здесь нижнюю часть.
I will press this beautiful fabric and show you what's next. I basted the wrong side with small stitches. Our eyelet shouldn't go away from the seam. Hide it like this, with eyelet on the wrong side of it. Now let's see how it will look from the right and the wrong sides. That's how you will do the folded hem. There's nothing to catch on the holes. It doesn't matter. I think we can be sure that everything is right. This is how it looks from the right side. I will make additional stitching. You won't see our lace here. The eyelet is perfectly hidden in this piping. There will always be a correct edge. Look at what we've got. Now I am stitching on the wrong side by 1 millimeter on the bias tape. I carefully sew along the edge of the bias tape. I hide the trimmed edge. It won't get out from here. Look at what the folded hem looks like. You can see that all the edges of the holes and threads are removed. It's reliable, and if you hem it this way, you will never have any problems. It's washable. It will never go to pieces. It's very important. Look here. Let's pipe the seam. Well, in order to pipe it, the seam is 1 centimeter, but I need to make it 7 millimeters. The right thing to do is sew it by 7 millimeters. This is the one stitch. Just take our bias tape, which was folded, where the one side is wider by 1 millimeter. Place the larger side to the bottom of the seam and the smaller side to the top. I put in 1 pin and I will start at the eyelet. I'm not going to baste it. That's how you'll put 2 cuts into the bias tape, turn it out, and stitch. Do you feel? It's full inside, so turn it out.
Аккуратненько вы видите, так раз и огибаем.
Don't baste here. While basting, it's moving and loses its shape. Look, it's beautiful. Today we learned how to work with eyelet, but you will work with other types of fabrics. And this lesson isn't only for eyelet. Of course, you can use this lesson for hemming and with other types of fabrics. This is also important for perforated fabrics. Now let's look at both sides. We can catch the edge on the wrong side. Otherwise, when you sew on this side, and you won't understand where the edge is from the other side. Well, our bottom is a little wider. Everything is reliable and perfect. Let's press the seam to one side. Look, it's beautiful. I think it's perfect. I showed you how to put piping on a plain seam and sew a folded hem. I wish you success in your work. Don't be afraid of complex fabrics or new solutions. In my opinion, if you have an interesting design, you will feel more comfort. Speaking from my personal experience. It's time to say goodbye. Click the like button and share our videos in social media and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching. All the best from Paukšte Irina Mikhailovna and the rest of our team.